Welcome into Storytime with the Commandant. Tonight we are reading Jack and the Beanstalk. So if you have a copy, go ahead and grab one so you can follow along. Jack was an idle, lazy boy who would not do any work to support his mother, and at last they both came so poor that the poor old woman had to sell her cow to buy food to keep them from starving. She sent Jack to the market with the cow, telling him to be sure and sell it for a good price. As Jack was going along the road to the market, he met a butcher. The butcher offered to buy the cow in exchange for a hat full of colored beans. Jack thought the beans looked very pretty, and he was glad to be saved the long, hot walk to the market. So he struck the bargain on the spot and went back to his mother with the beans, while the butcher went off with the cow. But the poor mother was so disappointed, she scolded her son for being lazy, no good for nothing, and flung the beans right out the window. Now, the beans were magic beans, and the next morning when Jack awoke, he found some of them had taken root in the night and had grown so tall that they reached right up to the sky. Jack was full of wonder and curiosity, and being fond of adventure and excitement, he set out at once to climb the beanstalk to see what was at the very top. And he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed some more, and then he climbed some more, and then he climbed a little bit more, until at last he climbed right up to the very tip top of the beanstalk. Then he found himself standing in a strange country. In the distance, he could see a big castle, and he was hot and tired from his long climb. He thought he would go and ask for something to eat and drink. He had not gone very far before he met a fairy who told him that the castle belonged to a wicked ogre who had killed and eaten a great number of people. It was he who ate your father, and it is your duty to the utmost to destroy that wicked monster. Go now and see what you can do. If you can carry off any of his treasures, you are at liberty to do so, for none of them really belong to him. He has taken them all by force from the people whom he has robbed. Jack was delighted at the idea of the adventure and set off in high spirits towards the castle. The castle was farther off than he had thought, and by the time he reached the gates, it was so late that he made up his mind to ask for a night's sleep there. There was a woman standing in the doorway, but when Jack made his request, she was very frightened and said, "Indeed, I dare not take you in and give you food and a room to sleep in. My husband is an ogre who lives on human flesh. If he were to find you here, he would think nothing of it to eat you right up. I advise that you go away at once before he comes home." But when she saw how tired and hungry Jack really was, she took him into the house, gave him plenty to eat and drink. While Jack was eating his food in the kitchen, there came a loud knocking at the door. The ogre's wife, in a great flurry, hid Jack in the oven and then hurried to let her husband in. Jack peeped through the oven door and saw a terrible looking ogre who came stamping into the kitchen. The ogre sat down at his table and ate his supper. After supper, he commanded his wife to bring him his money bags. He then began to count his money, thousands and thousands of pieces of gold and silver. Jack wished he could take some money home with him to his mother. And just when the ogre fell asleep, he crept out of his hiding place, hoisted the bags upon his shoulder, and slipped away quietly. The ogre was snoring so loudly that it sounded like wind in the chimney on a stormy night. So he never heard the little noise Jack made, and Jack got safely away and escaped down the beanstalk. His mother was overjoyed to see him, for she had been anxious about him when he did not come home the night before, and she was delighted with the bags of money, which were enough to keep them in comfort and luxury for some time. For many months, Jack and his mother lived happily together, but after a while, the money came to an end. Jack made up his mind to climb the beanstalk again and carry off some more of the ogre's treasure. So one morning, he got up early, put on a different suit of clothes so that the ogre's wife would not recognize him, and set out to climb the beanstalk. And he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed a little more, and he climbed a little more, and finally, at last, he came to the very top into the ogre's country again. When he reached the castle, the ogre's wife was again standing in the doorway. But when Jack asked for a night's stay, she dared not give him one, for only a few months before she had taken in a poor boy who seemed half dead. It was tired and hungry, and in return for her kindness, he had stolen her husband's money and ran away with it. But Jack begged so hard that at last she gave in. She gave him a good supper, hid him in the closet before her husband came home. And then there was a great noise outside and heavy footsteps that shook the castle's walls. It was the ogre who had come home. As soon as it entered the kitchen, he sniffed suspiciously and said, "I smell fresh meat." After supper, the ogre told his wife to fetch his hen. This hen was a very wonderful bird. Whenever the ogre said, "Lay," she laid an egg of solid gold. Jack thought that if he could only get this wonderful hen and take it to his mother, they would never want any more. So when the ogre fell asleep, as he did after a while, he came out of the closet, sizing up the hen in his arms, made off with her. The hen squawked, but the ogre's snoring was like the roaring of a sea when the tide was coming in, and Jack got away safely. The hen laid so many golden eggs that Jack and his mother became quite rich and prosperous, and there was really no need for Jack to go into the ogre's country again. But he liked the danger and excitement and remembered that the fairy had told him to take all of the ogre's treasure that he could find. And at last, without saying a word to anybody, he started off once more to climb the magic beanstalk. And he climbed, 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 until at last he reached the very tip top and stood in the ogre's country once again. This time, when he reached the castle, he began to be afraid that the ogre's wife really would not let him in. "Indeed, I dare not," she said. "Twice lately I have given shelter to a young boy, and each time he stole some of my husband's treasure and made off with him. Now, my husband has forbidden me to give no food or room to any traveler." But Jack pleaded and pleaded, and at last the good-natured woman, moved by his pity, gave him another meal and another room to stay in. When the ogre came home, the wife hid Jack in the cupboard. As usual, the ogre's first words were, "Wife, I smell fresh meat." And in spite of all the wife could say, he insisted upon searching all around the room. Jack was in a terrible fright while he was hunting, but fortunately he forgot to look in the cupboard, and after a time he sat down for his supper. When supper was over, the ogre told his wife to fetch his harp. Jack peeped out of the cupboard and saw the harp that was brought and set down before the ogre. It was marvelously made, and when the ogre said play, it played the finest music without even being touched. Jack was so enchanted, for he had never heard such beautiful music before, and he felt that he must have the harp for his own. The ogre was soon lulled to sleep by the sweet sound of the harp, and when he was snoring heavily, Jack crept out of the cupboard and taking up the harp was about to make off with it, but the harp was a fairy harp, and it called out loudly, "Master, master, master!" And although the ogre was snoring so noisy that it sounded like 100 dragons roaring at once, yet to Jack's dismay and horror, he heard the voice of the harp and started getting on his feet. With so much anger, he rushed after him. Jack ran faster than he had ever run before in his life, still carrying the precious harp, while the ogre ran after him, shouting and roaring and making so much noise that it sounded like a thousand thunderstorms all going off at once. If he had not drank and ate so much for supper, the ogre would have caught Jack fast. But the ogre was so full that he could not run nearly as fast as usual, and Jack reached the beanstalk just in front of him. It was a very close call for Jack, and he slid down the beanstalk at top speed, calling to the top of his voice for his mother to fetch him an axe. The ogre came tumbling down the beanstalk after him, but Jack seized the axe, chopped the beanstalk off close to the root. Down came the beanstalk, down came the ogre, and falling head on right into the garden. After this, Jack quite gave up his lazy ways, and he and his mother, with his magic hand and his wonderful harp, lived in happiness and prosperity for the rest of their lives. Thank you guys so much for listening to Jack and the Beanstalk. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Ask your parents first, so that way every time we add a new story, you get a notification. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.